Today we're talking with Next Pivot Point about how to build a DEI strategy and roadmap. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that is top of mind for many organizations right now. And while it's great that so many leaders are starting to really see the benefit of investing in DEI and starting to prioritize that, creating a DEI strategy that is meaningful and sustainable over time is really, really challenging. So today I'm just super excited to be diving into this topic as we explore how to approach a starting point for DEI. And I wanted to start off by introducing our speakers. First, Brian Wells is our Customer Success Manager here at Cooleaf. He helps to lead up our onboarding and inclusion efforts for our team. And today he's going to be giving us a peek into how Cooleaf helps our customers to run their DEI programming. So, hey, Brian.
Hello, hello.
And then Julie is going to be leading today's DEI workshop for us. Julie is a highly acclaimed TEDx speaker and inclusive leadership trainer who led teams and produced results in corporate America. After experiencing many career pivot points of her own, she started her own speaking business with the goal of helping leaders to be more inclusive. Julie is a frequent keynote speaker, podcast host, and executive coach. She holds an MBA from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, is a certified master coach, and is a certified unconscious bias trainer. So welcome, Julie.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you both on this webinar today. And again, for those of you who are just joining, I'm Melissa, and I'll be helping to moderate the webinar. And then we also have Catherine from Next Pivot Point on as well, who will be helping moderate the chat today. So here is a brief agenda for what we're going to go through. Brian and I will start off by sharing a bit more about Cooleaf and how it can really help benefit your DEI strategy. And then we'll jump into the workshop with Julie. And be sure to stick around for the end today. We'll be sharing that SHRM activity code. So this webinar is eligible for 1 PDC. And we'll also share a free resource that we've been putting together for you all on DEI calendar. So be sure to stick around. We'll be sharing that information in the chat and then also in the follow-up email today. And again, if you have questions, drop them in. We're looking forward to the Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So over the last few years, the world of work has really changed dramatically with the rise of remote work, the Great Resignation, and the changing landscape of how we all think about purpose in our jobs. And now more and more companies are really reevaluating the way that they approach culture, employee well-being, and of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Cooleaf helps companies to make sure that they're providing a positive and fulfilling environment for their people, where their employees really feel valued, empowered, and included into that culture. And the way we do that is by developing an employee experience strategy that helps you to engage, measure, and listen to your people's needs. So the way that this really all comes together is in this integrated platform where employees can recognize one another for achievements, share stories of wins and successes, and participate in challenges and activities that help to reinforce a sense of belonging and connection with their team. And all of these behaviors are then incentivized in Cooleaf with a points-based reward system that we use to help maintain that adoption and engagement over time. But now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Brian, who is really the expert in how we can help to drive employee engagement using Cooleaf.
Absolutely, thank you. Awesome. So really at the heart of diversity, equity, and inclusion is creating a space for the different perspectives that make up your organization. And so Cooleaf helps spark education, discussion, and celebration with our DEI challenges. And so I wanted to show you all an example of a Cooleaf challenge and really how it works. And so typically what we do is we provide a prompt or a task. And so in this case, a read and response about what diversity means to you. And so the goal of these challenges is to help highlight new perspectives and drive inclusion. And with a challenge like this, we're giving team members an opportunity to share their stories, life experiences, educate themselves and others, and really bring team members together. We also have the ability to work with your team's ERGs to create custom challenges. So for example, if you wanted to create a challenge that was targeted specifically for a women's network ERG or a young professionals ERG, Black in Tech ERG, we can absolutely help to create that space for you as well. I want to go ahead and bump forward here. Awesome. And so the next thing we really wanted to do was kind of highlight how one of our clients and customers has really kind of leveraged their DEI initiative within our platform and how they've really excelled with this. And so here's an example of how we were able to help them really kind of engage their efforts around Pride Month. And so using the same challenge format, they were able to create, American Auto Shield was able to create a virtual music playlist challenge that encouraged everyone to share their favorite songs that promoted freedom and acceptance. And so the idea here is, the ability to foster a more inclusive workspace, embracing new ways to connect with your teams, and really leveraging new technology that's at your fingertips to really kind of promote that more diverse and equitable environment. So you can see some of these really awesome responses that we were able to, that American Auto Shield was able to get out of their workspace and really kind of develop this really, really exciting music and virtual music playlist. Awesome. So next, we wanted to talk a little bit about our DEI toolkit. And so one of the things that we've done is that we've helped develop a toolkit that can be leveraged within our system and our platform. And so we really feel that DEI needs to be integrated into ongoing communications, and not something that's just talked about a few times a year. And so really effective internal communications can help amplify your DEI efforts. And so we've created, we've created some content to help with that. And so in addition to challenges, Cooleaf can help with educational posts, communications around days of celebration or observation that get posted onto the main feed of our platform, as well as being pushed out via email. We also integrate with platforms like Slack and MS Teams to help drive deeper engagement. And so we're really, really excited about some of the different tools and content that we've been able to help develop to really help drive deeper engagement and help leverage DEI initiatives across other organizations. Awesome. And then lastly, so how Cooleaf and Next Pivot Point can really kind of help support your DEI strategy. And so while we're super excited about helping organizations leverage their DEI initiatives through programming and other means, we can support partners like Next Pivot Point within the platform by integrated video content and other resources, so employees can have a central hub for DEI and really get rewarded for their participation. So we're really excited about having a DEI partner like Next Pivot Point, who we feel can share their expertise and really kind of help you get the most out of your DEI program. So I'd like to turn things over to Julie, who can kind of really lead us through today's DEI strategy and roadmap workshop session.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Such awesome tools y'all have. So I think everybody, you're going to find a plethora of tools, information, and resources that we're going to share with you live today in the chat in a couple different ways, and in some follow-up communications as well. So if you have questions that we don't get to, use the Q&A feature. We want to hear from you there. We want to hear from you on the chat. So if you haven't introduced yourself yet, this is just such a great opportunity to get to know like-minded folks in other industries and other organizations where you can share ideas and connect with offline. So highly recommend that. Just a bit about me. Melissa did a great job with the introduction, but I've been doing this work for about 8 years now. Before that, I spent 12 years in corporate, most of the time as a people leader. And I always felt like I didn't have the tools for inclusion. DEI was not an acronym being thrown around in corporate settings back then either. And so kind of my own learning journey and my own kind of lack of belonging in those settings prompted me to start my own business, Next Pivot Point. Catherine's also joining me on the team, so she'll be moderating the chat. If you have any questions, we've got tons of resources we can share with you too. We truly believe this doesn't have to be so hard to do, but a lot of leaders, maybe you feel like this, feel like it's another thing to do, this DEI thing. It feels like I don't know where to start, or sometimes we don't know what to say or do, so we don't say anything at all. Seeing with the recent news events, only 10% of companies have had any communication with their employees about recent events in the news. There's just such an opportunity to bring humanity into the workplace. And that's really, I think, what DEI really means. Why I do this work, I've got 3 kiddos and certainly have a lot of privileges associated with their identities, but being girls does mean that the world will treat them differently. Currently, we're actually experiencing a backslide in the forecast for gender equity. And that certainly frustrates me as a mama of 3. I want the world to be more inclusive for them. So that's really why I do what I do. Just to kind of level set some ground rules, we want to hear from you. So bring it on the chat. I'd love to see all the chats. Again, Q&A. We'll get as many questions answered as we possibly can. We want to hear from everybody. So please engage in the chat, even if it's just, hey, I'm here. That's fine with us. It's not about being perfect at this. Please. If you're just getting started on the journey, you're not alone. There are a lot of organizations that have not started on the journey. So we want honesty. This isn't about being perfect. This isn't about keeping score. And it's a brave place to bring your full self. So we really want to make sure that we're modeling inclusion and psychological safety. As we know, those are the tenets of DEI that work to create positive learning environments. A couple things we're going to talk about. So Melissa, if you had registered before Tuesday, she sent a link to our blog post, which Catherine can also share again in the chat, where we define kind of the 3 key components of a DEI strategy. So DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll explain what those words mean in a minute. But I really believe in co-creation of these terms. Every organization will share a lot of templates and examples with you today, but every organization defines these things a little bit differently. So we call this the what. What do we mean? This is like base camp. Like people need to know what these terms mean and how we're internalizing them and embedding in our organization. So I'll share some examples on how to craft that. That'll be our first activity that we'll do together. And then the why. And the why is not secondary, it's actually primary. But the what followed by the why is, as you likely know, Simon Sinek and others have been talking about starting with the why for many, many years. Humans make decisions based on emotions. We are very active in the limbic part of our brain, the rational part of our brain we like to think we use, but we usually justify our decisions, our emotional decisions rationally. All that to say, DEI is emotional, it's human, and there should be an emotional component to it. So why? Why does this matter? And the question I'm going to ask you specifically is, why does it matter now? Right? There was an opportunity in the summer of 2020 to make big, bold claims and donations and all sorts of things when it was fashionable in the news cycle. Many of those organizations didn't follow through on those commitments or activities. And that's, in my mind, almost worse than not doing something at all. Is the follow through and consistency. And we need the why for it to stay top of mind for folks. If you don't have the why, it lacks passion, it lacks longevity. And then the how. So we'll talk through some how ideas. We've got Cooleaf's great resource kit. We've got some resources for you to share as well. So basically deciding the key activities we're going to commit to doing for the next 1 to 3 years. 1 year kind of gets tactical. So we like to push our clients to kind of a 3-year outlook because budgets can get cut and things can change in a year, especially when there's talks of economic downturn happening. If DEI is important, then it gets resourced just like any part of the business, and we don't go up and down with the economic cycle, right? We have to stay with it consistently. And I'll share some examples of organizations who have done just that and have seen tremendous results. So I first want to ask you an icebreaker question. I'm going to get you involved. why do we need a strategy? So why are you here? And just pick a couple reasons you can share with a group. We have this cool software. It's called Poll Everywhere. If anyone's used it, you can see the link at the top of the page. You can also text your responses and they'll automatically populate here. Catherine is sharing that. And she is sharing that link in the chat as well. So awesome. 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 I see some chats coming in. Perfect. So just keep them coming. Think of, why do we need a strategy? Why are you here? What are you hoping to learn? You can just type in those responses and it'll create a word cloud, which I think is just really fun to see. You know, what are you and your peers and like-minded folks here? What do y'all have in common? Where are you looking at this from? Yeah, it can't be held accountable. The roadmap, yes, to support our ESG efforts as well and sustainability. So yeah, absolutely. DEI is really tied to ESG work. If you haven't, if y'all are familiar with that, environment, social, and governmental. Sometimes we used to call that corporate social responsibility. For connection and belonging, yeah, the roadmap, clarity. We need to know how to measure this. Absolutely, we'll talk about that. Metrics. We need a plan. Workplace inclusion. A better work environment, which helps our community. I couldn't agree more. When people say this is, DEI is a nice to have, there's so much data to support that is a must have. Not only are there tremendous business outcomes associated with diverse teams, innovation, revenue, profitability, lots of data out there. I think the more connected you are and the more reflective you are of the communities of which you hope to serve, you're just going to be more relevant to your customers and your community bases too. So when you're out of sync and not represented, especially at the top of the leadership levels that tend to be not well diversified, then we risk that irrelevance that can come with that. So love to see these here. And I see some chats coming in. No innovation can happen without diversity. Yeah, think about the most diverse teams you've been a part of. Right? Didn't they have a tremendous amount of ideation and innovation? The only downside I found to diversity is sometimes it takes longer to make decisions because there is some kind of group divergence that happens with different perspectives being shared, but the holistic perspective that you get from it far outweighs the time commitment. Work more effectively with changing demographics. Yes, I love that in the chat. Gen Z. Goes no surprise, every generation gets progressively more diverse. But Gen Z is really interesting because unlike millennials, which I, by some definitions, fall into that camp, or Gen X, I can't keep them straight. But millennials would enter the workforce with the expectation that diversity was a nice thing to have, and quickly got that kind of impression. Maybe not so much. Maybe we're not there yet. Gen Z is entering the workforce with the expectation that it will be an inclusive culture and that will be diverse because their generation is incredibly diverse. It's the first generation that's non-majority white, and biracial and multicultural are the biggest demographics of growth in that generation. And a lot of folks identify as LGBTQ+, which simply just wasn't something that people felt safe doing with previous generations. So just lots of reasons to care here if you want to be relevant to the next generation of top talent. I love some of these new ones coming in: connection, belonging, tracking progress. Yeah, keep them coming. So we'll have several activities. We want to hear from you, and hopefully you learn from some of your peers on what's on their mind as well. One of the things we wanted to share with you. So when we engage with clients, we usually start with some fact finding, some data, because business decisions should be based on actual data. With DEI, that's usually attitudinal data. So sometimes we'll do that via listening sessions or assessments. So what you're seeing here is a free assessment we have on our website, a resource that we'll share with you. You're more than welcome to do this and compare notes with maybe some of your peers or leadership team. Is really interesting to get perspectives on. But essentially, these are 20 best practices. And there are assessments that do much deeper dives into DEI systems and processes, but these are kind of our top 20. So this is a simple, again, free assessment that you can click on right on our homepage, at the top of our homepage, and share with as many folks as you would like to do. And it'll give you a result. So this is an example that we did with a client earlier this summer. They have a DEI council, so a group of folks that guide the strategy in the organization. And we had all 8 of them participate in doing this assessment. And then we'll do this with all employees and compare and contrast as we have more activity around DEI. And hopefully these things get better. So as you can see, the things in green are the things that they felt like we were doing pretty well at. It's on a 1 to 5 point scale, with 5 being strongly agree, 1 being strongly disagree. And then the red were certainly opportunities for them to get better. Yellow were kind of mid-tier priorities that we may or may not involve in the plan. So however you decide to do a plan, I think doing an assessment up front, whether it's ours or there's certainly a lot of organizations that provide these, at a minimum, do some listening sessions, gather some data, get some ideas of what needs to be improved, because systems and processes are really, really the pinnacle of real diversity work. Simply just doing the education or the one and done Women's History Month, Black History Month, y'all have been a part of those activities where it just felt very check the box. By being intentional up front, you can really, really get an accurate picture. And more importantly, you can measure progress and success after you've done more of those education and consistent activities. So it's just a snapshot of things to consider, systems. And Catherine also shared the link in the chat. So don't do it now, keep it open for later. And it gives you some really good scoring. Most of our clients score in like the mid 60s is the average on that. So 100 is almost impossible because, everyone's on the journey. Even the best organizations that will share with you today some case studies, they're still not where they want to be, where they're at on this. And if they were, I would almost be skeptical if that was really true. So I mentioned the what before. Some key terms I just want to level set with folks because these things can mean different things to different people. So I'm just going to use some simple definitions, but please know you're welcome to, and I encourage you to co-create your own definition at your organization. Diversity, simply put, is just different groups of folks, okay? And so most often people go to race and gender. I would argue broadening the definition of diversity is just a smart thing to do because it includes more people, and there's more diversity to the human experience beyond things that we think we can see, which gender and race we can't always see. Ethnicity, sexual orientation, abilities are some other areas. You've probably heard about neurodiversity, socioeconomics, and a minimum perspective. Folks that grew up in different environments or cultures are going to bring a different perspective to the conversation. And that tends to be highly correlated with innovation, revenue, profitability. When I say majority group, this is just the group that, generally speaking, holds the most power in society and workplaces. This is certainly the case in the US as well as in most global organizations. So by those kind of key dimensions of diversity, I think white, straight, male, cisgender, non-disabled. Cisgender just simply means I identify the same gender of which I was assigned at birth. Okay, so I received female on my birth certificate. I identify as female. I am cisgender. Inclusion. So, and a little history lesson on this. Back when diversity work first started, it was very common to have a chief diversity officer, a CDO, and you still see that role occasionally in organizations. More often, they added the I to it because what they found by increasing diverse representation, without inclusion, it didn't work, right? It was just kind of this vicious cycle of burning and churning through folks with diverse backgrounds, because if you don't feel included, you're not going to stay. So this is kind of that sense of longing for diverse groups of people. Do they feel included? Do they feel like their ideas are heard? Do they feel like they're invited? Do they feel like the workplace is fair? And that's a really interesting one to unpack because the majority group, oftentimes when surveyed, they're 20 to 30 percentage points higher on their perception of fairness in the workplace versus folks in more marginalized groups. So just think about that. And I think what's important is think about, if I think the workplace is fair, maybe trading the perspective with somebody else of their perception, somebody of a different gender identity or racial identity or someone from a different culture or background, do they feel the same way I do, right? Because we're all a product of our own lived experiences and we need others' perspectives to enrich our own perspective as well. So when I say underrepresented groups, or sometimes we use marginalized groups, these are groups that fall outside the majority group by one or more factors. So someone that identifies as a person of color, non-white, LGBTQ+, which just simply stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer. And then the plus is all encompassing for other gender identities or sexual orientations. Female, gender non-binary, meaning you don't exclusively identify as male or female. It's gender fluidity. You may have heard of that term too, or someone that has a disability. And again, these are not all exhaustive. There are so many more dimensions that we could throw in here as well. And then equity. So equity, I think, is best described by this image. If you've been involved in DEI work, you've probably seen this. There's hundreds of different versions. This is one of the most simplest ones to go through. I personally like a lot of different versions aside from this one. But the idea here is that if work was a baseball game, there are fences that get in our way from fully participating in a baseball game. So if we give everybody the same level of support, despite their height differential, we get more of the same. Okay, so that's equality. Treating people the same, getting more of the same. It's kind of the definition of insanity. If we want diversity, we have to do things differently, meaning meeting people where they're at and shifting the boxes based on their height differential here. So if you use the metaphor, it's like the boxes are like levels of support. It might be a women's leadership development program. It might be addressing bias in the hiring process. It might be equitable promotions, but they're addressing systemic pieces so that the fence eventually goes away and there's no longer systemic barriers. But we are centuries away from those things happening. Okay, so the first activity I want to guide you through, and this is kind of the first tenet of a DEI strategic plan, is the what. So I want you to think about this question. What does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to us? And I see some chats about belonging and inclusion. Yeah, they're not the same thing. Absolutely. Those terms do mean different things. Some of my clients actually have DIBS as their framework. So diversity, inclusion, belonging as part of that. I'm also increasingly seeing justice with the J. I've seen JEDI as an acronym. This language is constantly evolving. DEI has actually become the majority used term probably in the last 2 to 3 years. D+I was much more common before that. And then thinking about the what. So thinking about if you want to use these terms, or maybe your firm, your organization use diversity and inclusion, I would definitely broaden it beyond diversity for obvious reasons that we just talked about, because having diversity is not enough. And having inclusion doesn't necessarily mean that we've achieved belonging as well. So think about the words that you want to use. If you want to follow some good organizations, they're not perfect, but Salesforce and Adobe have done a pretty good job of defining and putting front and center that DEI is embedded in our culture and how we do. You know, Salesforce has, I think last time I checked, over a dozen Ohana groups or employee resource groups. They've had these for years. They did it before it was the in trend thing to do. And I've had the chance to work with them and do workshops with them and spend time with their DEI team. And they truly are following through on the things they said they do. They've done gender pay gap studies, not just once, but multiple times to ensure that those are not repeated. And they've really taken a look at systems. They've created a workplace where a lot of folks really do want to work. I live in a community that employs quite a bit of folks, and it is the coveted job. So you think about the ability to attract talent with statements like this, and more importantly, real actions behind their statements, as well as Adobe. So just 2 examples here. I won't bore you with reading through these. And then think about what this means to you. So these are just some examples to think about. What does it mean to you? And I'll share a couple more examples. Sometimes my clients will say a brave place to be ourselves. Psychological safety comes up a lot. That sense of belonging that we've been talking about here and in the chat, that deep commitment and appreciation of differences. So these are just some examples. I've done this exercise many, many, many times over the last several years. And some folks get a little wordy, some keep it short and sweet. These aren't perfect examples, but I just want to share some templates, some ideas that you can build off of. And just think about, what do we value at our organization? So what does diversity and equity mean to us? And don't get to the why just yet. We're purposely going to wait to the next activity to talk about why it matters. Okay. So if you could, we've got the poll everywhere up. What does this mean to us? So if you think about what diversity, equity, and inclusion means at our organization, how would you describe it? And think about it in the simplest of terms, right? Think about it as, I'm going to describe this to my neighbor or to a child in my life or to a peer that may not understand these things just yet. Like, keep it simple, but also keep it meaningful. Really dial in on what it means. Equity is like being invited to the party, but no one asks you to dance. Yeah, that's interesting. There is an analogy. I believe this is a Verna Myers one, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Netflix. She says, Diversity is like being invited to the party. Inclusion is feeling like you can dance, and belonging is feeling like you dance and you're not going to be judged, like you don't care. And I do love that analogy. Most of these are coming in here. The ability for everyone to be their full selves without the fear of retribution. That's like the definition of psychological safety. Amy Edmondson's work. I love that. Everyday expectation. Your needs are met at your level. Oh, I like that. Meet people where they're at. Opening up opportunities for others who've been left out over the years and eradicate different. I love that. The ability for everyone to be their whole selves. All people, regardless of who they are, have equal opportunity to unapologetically show up and be my authentic self without fear of barriers or expectations. These are awesome. Allowing employees to bring their authentic selves to work. Acceptance, respect, impact the culture in a positive way. These are great. Keep them coming, and you can always share in the chat. I love this. Everyone's dancing at the party, but no one's sitting down on the sidelines. Yeah. Yeah, I'd prefer to be planning the party. I think that's an interesting point, Catherine. Yeah. And thinking about this, metaphors, I think, are really nice because DEI work can get pretty academic and complicated and nuanced, and it might be confusing for folks because language does matter and understanding language. So that's why I like metaphors like this. We use the metaphor about meetings. And meetings, if you think about it, are a snapshot of a culture. Right? Who gets invited? Who's listened to? Who gets to make the decision? Right? And think about that. If you're honest with yourself, folks in the majority group are generally overrepresented in meeting invites, in speaking up, and in actually being heard. And so when I use that example, I say diversity is like being invited, inclusion's like speaking up, belonging, back to the point about belonging and inclusion, belonging is like having my voice be actually heard. How you are treated at work helps develop your self-esteem and self-worth. Many people's part of their identity is directly related to their work. It is. We spend a lot of time at work. Most Americans spend 50-ish hours a week at work. And even if it's hybrid and you're saving that commute time nowadays, like that's a lot of time that you spend. And so there's never been an on and off switch for DEI. Something I'm really passionate about is teaching folks how to be inclusive in all spheres of their lives, not just professionally, but personally as well. It's awfully important, though, to our identities, how we're treated. And human beings are just naturally, we are very wired to feel a sense of fairness and justice and respect. And when we don't feel like those things, we usually don't stay in places where we don't feel those things, at least not long term. So now I'm going to migrate to the why. The next exercise I'd love for you to participate in is, why is this important? So I shared a bunch of data points earlier. I promise this is all backed up by real research. So Pew Research Center, Catalyst, McKinsey & Company, Forbes, Harvard Business Review. There is no shortage of data. Just believe me when I say that decisions are better 87% of the time. I'm going to take those odds every day. Have higher revenue rates and higher chances of profitability based on diversity against industry peers. And just think about too, the human component, it's feeling like a sense of belonging. If you're working with people that don't feel like they belong or can't be them full selves, there's no way you're getting the best effort or the best work from them. So think about why this matters. There's clearly a return on investment, but again, think about the business case as well as the human case. So I'll share some examples here. The things I hear from my clients most often is growth, relevance, mirroring our future customers, being representative of our communities of which we want to serve. I like the innovation point. I like the retention pieces. I like working for a place that cares about humans. I mean, really saying this out loud. And when we lead this exercise inside organizations, much like we are today, we use the poll everywhere, you can get a lot of different perspectives, and especially getting them from senior leaders. I think one of the hallmarks we know of effective DEI work is it's consistent, it's intentional, and senior leadership is highly engaged in it. Right? So the minute your senior leaders don't attend or don't talk about diversity on a regular basis, people really start to read between the lines and recognize maybe it's not so important. So senior leadership is really important. And the middle manager in big organizations is also super important. Just some examples here from my clients. Again, when we go through this exercise, we'll create our what statement, our why statement, and then we create the roadmap with the how. So we'll give you lots of different how techniques here in the next chunk. But for now, really think about the why. And I love like this idea of we recognize folks as people, not just workers. I mean, saying that out loud, how we prioritize this, how this makes us stronger, why we want to capitalize on all our collective strengths. So I love some of these words here. And what you might consider doing is just kind of plucking words that resonate with you or creating bridges to dialogue that you've had in your organization. But why does it matter to us? And one of the key words here is now, right? So summer of 2022, as we're recording this, why does it matter right now? I mean, there is a lot going on in the world. Why now, and why for the future? Okay, because again, I think we've seen folks come in and out of this conversation opportunistically and had negative repercussions. Folks are wanting to hold organizations accountable, and I think people are seeing our political system isn't necessarily able to move at the same speed as which organizations and companies can do. And we can vote with our dollars. And that's one thing that I think we've heard from folks that value diversity that gives them a sense of power is aligning themselves with organizations that support their values and support DEI. So why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to us now? I'd love to hear from you. Again, you can do the chat, you can do the poll everywhere. Catherine just shared the link again, so you can click on it really easily. But why does this matter? Why does this matter to your organization right now? Investors are making decisions. Yes. And I believe NASDAQ has a requirement about diverse representation on boards, and California has done some things with board representation. It should have almost mattered 100% retention. It matters to our clients. Clients are asking about this. I've also heard a lot of job applicants are asking about this. We can't support our customers and clients without support from those within. Absolutely. We got to do this internally before we can do it externally, 100%. Recruiting the best candidates, a diverse workforce is stronger and more effective. Yes. And if anybody's here like, oh, no clients or future employees or regulators or investors have asked us, they will. They will. And that shouldn't be the reason. Fear should not drive the rationale for this. But it is certainly not a conversation that's going away. I think a lot of people think like, oh, is this DEI going to go away? Like we actually had a well-intentioned but very confused leader say that to us. I think we're talking about it too much. And it's like, really? And most folks, especially those passionate about DEI, feel like we're not talking about it nearly enough. Yeah, we want happy, innovative people. People want to connect to someone that looks like them, sounds like them, who can relate to them. If they don't get that at their organization, they simply go where they can. Yeah. As human beings, we are wired to connect. Affinity bias, something that affects all of us, myself included. We're drawn to people like us because we think we have things in common and we think we can feel safe with folks like us. So a lot of times we don't diversify our networks, even though we know about these rich benefits, just because of that primal default mode to surround ourselves with likeness. And again, that's not where we're going to learn the most. That's not where we're going to grow the most. Great ones coming in, a more diverse world, globalization, capitalizing on all personnel, some great examples coming in as well. I think this is important internally and externally, meaning those coming in to receive service. Yeah. If I get into the DNA of society, you have to impact hearts and minds, people build institutions and systems. Yes, it's back to that human case. So I often share, much like I did on my why with my daughters, that's my human case for this work and for having this business. I feel really lucky that I get to do something that's so missional and so rooted in my values on a daily basis. But I think for everyday organizations, dialing in on that human case, how does this make us a better organization? How does this make us better for humanity by doing this? And really spending some time postulating on this. A lot of times when I do this exercise with companies, we did it really quick today, but we might spend 20, 30 minutes. We usually have our article as a pre-read so that folks can really think on it, especially introverts or time to process kind of folks. Might need some time because these are some deep, heavy questions. And having everybody be heard is also a best practice. Now, a lot of organizations like to jump to the how first. I had so many organizations do this. I mean, over the last 8 years, it was almost always how. Until the last couple of years, people got more strategic and intentional. It's like, okay, we want to train our people. Okay, we want to build an action plan. And it's like, back up, right? What we just did, although it feels lofty. I think sometimes it feels wordy, but getting the feelings and the definition out is really, really important. It's like the cart before the horse. Like, get these clear things defined, have a short paragraph with your what and why. And then the how is, how do we make that happen, right? So once you have your DEI statement, it has an element of purpose and an element of vision, an element of heart, an element of business results, has all the things in there. Then the tentacles are really the how, the roadmap, the action plan. So this is how you make your DEI statement come to life. These are just some things that are very common tactics that organizations we partner with and serve do. I'm a big fan of systems and processes. So everything from hiring and recruiting to promotions to separations, how performance is managed. These systems are riddled with bias. And if you don't believe me, I just read a wonderful book by Joan C. Williams called Bias Interrupted. She has data. 14,000 people have responded to her surveys about workplace systems. And my biggest takeaway is folks don't feel like it's fair. But folks in the majority group oftentimes believe they're much more fair, those systems and processes. So think about that. What systems and processes do we want to address? Again, hiring is a common one for obvious reasons, promotions, separations. People in underrepresented groups leave organizations at a 2 to 3x higher rate. Why is that, right? Unpacking data around that's important. And then addressing bias, training, education. It's probably 80% of the journey. People don't know what they don't know. And if you grow up, someone like me, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in the Midwest of the United States. DEI was not something that was talked about actively. I was even a women's studies minor in college. I did not know that career paths were available in this. So just to say, for folks that entered the workforce, 20, 30 years ago, like me, like you didn't know this, you don't know how to do this. So people actually need training, they need education. A lot of times they need just the words to say, words not to say. And they're so afraid of stumbling and bumbling and making a mistake that then they just don't say anything at all. And if you're a people leader, that's extremely problematic, right? Because then people are getting the message like this isn't important if you're not talking about it. Having a DEI committee, task force, council, advisory board, we have lots of different structures we worked with. Marketing, how to communicate this, not just internally, but externally as well. We do a lot of partnerships on content creation, videos, blogs, resources, talk tracks, that kind of thing. People are really looking for micro tools nowadays, 5-minute snippet videos or 5-minute downloadable resources that they can guide a conversation with. Community engagement, absolutely being involved in the communities that we want to serve. And Catherine, thanks for sharing that book in the chat. It's a really good one on systems work. So I mentioned before at the beginning, we like to go in and do an assessment with our clients. Again, that assessment is totally complimentary on our website. You can get to it directly from the homepage at the top. It's just nextpivotpoint.com/assessment, but these 20 areas, and we could do hundreds, and we have partners that do more in-depth quantitative assessments. But just for now, if you're getting started, I would want to know perceptions around the organization, and at a minimum with the leadership team before I engaged in a DEI strategy exercise, I would want some data. How consistent is our definition, right? How much do people perceive senior leadership is involved in this? What kind of candid conversations are we having or not having about diversity? Do I know my role? Does my manager discuss it? Do I feel seen and heard? Are there equal opportunities, meeting representation, recruiting, promotions, retention? You can see how this canvases a lot of the systems and the perception of the systems inside an organization. So again, there are lots more things you can assess, but this is a really great starting point that helps our clients just and it's almost like you're in the plane and waiting for it to take off. It just helps get you flying a little bit. It's kind of like kicking off the training wheels. It's just getting some data and starting to put pen to paper. Because I think analysis paralysis can happen with this work. And especially when we get into organizations and peel back representation data, there's a tendency to want to hide that because it's not perfect. It's not where we want it to be. Good organizations admit their flaws and weaknesses and show their representation as an expectation that it will get better. That doesn't have to be with concrete goals that sometimes can create a zero-sum game. There's definitely pros and cons to that approach. Accountability is important. The expectation that these metrics will get better, that representation will get better, at a minimum should be declared. So discussion, think about what things we want to do, the tactics. We finally get to the action items here. Two examples from previous clients. A lot of clients like to do assessments and measurements up front, have the definition and the communication plan. So I encourage clients to do 3 to 5 things really well versus a list of 20 things that nothing's going to do well, and resource it. One thing McKinsey and Company found last year with the Women in the Workplace report is that DEI work is heavily falling on the shoulders of women, and it's not perceived to be a promotable task, that it's kind of like office housework. And that's something people do in their free time. That's not fair. Resource it, have dollars, free up somebody's day job time so they can actually do DEI work, or have a DEI leader and team to support them. Having a communications person is really important for DEI work. Having somebody that can get in HR that can get a hold of data is really important for this to work. So think about what resources, we would never launch a new product or service and not resource it, right? Why would we do that with DEI? It just shows the importance. And then maybe think about next year. So I kind of like, again, that 1 to 3 year look. So this is a really great time to think about, okay, what can we do in 2022? Still got 6-ish months left, 5 months. And what's 2023 look like? A lot of our clients are planning their budgets for DEI in August and September, and then getting ready to roll those out in January. January is always a very fun, very busy month. But think about, what do we want to train folks on? How do we want to train our leaders, especially those middle managers? They're such a huge part of the employee experience. And then you can see some other examples over here. Maybe it's a wage gap analysis. There's great organizations that specialize in that. We do not. Taking together your data, your metrics, getting together best practices, doing a bias assessment, having DEI story sharing. I love the tool that Brian shared at the beginning about Pride Month, making a playlist, doing fun activities. And I know they have a fantastic calendar of all the DEI themes across the year. And I just encourage you, don't flip it on like an on-off switch. Pride Month, for example, June 1st, people are coming hot and heavy. And by July 1st, pride flags are going down. We should be talking about these things holistically all year, but there's certainly great opportunities to celebrate culture and celebrate our history in there as well. And then just wrapping up here, I want to hear from you all. What things do you want to do? I gave you a bunch of ideas there. And I see a question here in the chat. Can you speak to data collection, especially for smaller organizations, or the kind of data option? Yeah, is optional to share. Yeah. So there's a lot of data that we can't necessarily collect. Disability, sexual orientation, things like that. Gender and race, typically speaking, and this is, I trust my HR friends to educate us on this. What data is available and what data can they share? In smaller organizations, you could really just take a snapshot of the organization, walking around and doing that. We never want to make assumptions on what gender. Again, it could be non-binary, so we never want to make an assumption about somebody, but asking someone their pronouns would certainly give that clue as well. So making an informal sharing or reporting, the why behind that's really important. So when people feel like their personal information is being collected, why are you using this, right? And say, hey, we want to have a clear understanding of the diversity of our employee experience. That's why I like representation data is great, but better attitudinal data. So that 20 question assessment, I might start with that if you think it's going to be sensitive to collect demographic data. Create awareness, develop a DEI program. Yeah, the strategy and the commitment, a dedicated DEI role in our organization. Most of our volunteering, that's so common. Even in big organizations, a lot of people volunteering, that they're leading ERGs, employee resource groups, in their free time, or they're doing this after hours. We just did a big study with an organization, 100 middle managers. All of them said, I don't have enough time to do it. I was like, do you not have enough time, or is this not a priority? Right? So it's kind of that chicken and egg problem. It is still elective to choose one's ethnicity when onboarding, so it's still difficult to collect that. Yep. If it's elective, 100%. I'd say in a small organization, if you have the ability to capture that informally, that might be the better way to do that. Development of our DEI program, education, hiring, and developing our webpage to share information. Yeah, have a webpage like you would for anything else. Could you talk a little bit about how companies are tying DEI to well-being? Yeah. So well-being or just overall health. This is mental health. Mental health has a huge tie to diversity work. So showing this is how we support our employees, mental health and inclusion. We know when folks don't feel included that their mental health can suffer. So absolutely, that's a component of wellness. Learning more about the legal global company running a DEI program. That's cool. Okay, awesome. All right. Well, I know we're almost at time, so I want to leave some time for some more questions. And I know Melissa's got that SHRM code to share, so stick around. We wanted to do something fun for y'all today since we had over 600 people register. So we anticipate a lot of folks seeing this in the recording as well. We wanted to give you a special offer. We have a package of allyship toolkit. So a lot of the things we're talking about today, as well as how to talk about this with kiddos in your life. So we will raffle this off to the first person that gets this question correct. So this is a $45 value that we will send to you in the mail. So you'll just, if you win, you'll give Catherine your address and she'll get it in the mail to you soon. Share your answer in the chat. So the first person to respond correctly, Catherine will get and send you this allyship toolkit. What are the three main components you need for a diversity and inclusion strategy? Alexa say you are on it. I love it. What, why, how? Everyone's listening. Good. Well, if you could, Alexa, share that with Catherine. Share your address where you want us to send your allyship toolkit. And for everybody else, if you're interested, they're all on Amazon and they're on our website as well if you want some tools. The last thing I wanted to mention is we have actually a free open enrollment workshop next week. So if you like this experience and you want to maybe share it with some folks at your organization, feel free to come to that. It's only 45 minutes next Thursday. So it's a week from now. We built a Lead Like an Ally program because we were hearing a lot about virtual meeting fatigue, like folks are talking about burnout, mental health issues, psychological safety, just a lot of issues happening in the workplace that weren't addressed. And so we built a specific program that we'll do a demo of next week to meet people where they're at with some micro learning and more importantly, some tools and resources for leaders that have a lot vying for their time right now. So that webinar, you can just scan the QR code here. Catherine will also share that link in the chat, but you're all welcome and invited to attend that as well. Thanks so much, Melissa. This has been so fun to be with everybody. Thanks so much for all your great participation. I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That was super insightful. And I also just loved seeing everyone's participation throughout. For me, it was just really inspiring and definitely got me thinking about a lot of different things. So appreciate you all being so open and sharing your perspectives with us. But I did want to, we are going to have some time for questions for Julie, but I wanted to also share a free resource from the Cooleaf team that I hope will be helpful for your planning efforts. So this is a downloadable DEI calendar that's meant to be a starting point for leaders who are wanting to level up their DEI programming in a way that'll be fun and engaging for their teams. So this is available in multiple formats. We have it as a Google Calendar that you can add, and then you can also download it as a PDF. So it's on that blog that I just posted. We also keep it updated. So if you want to bookmark it, we'll have all the dates in there for next year as well to help your DEI planning. And then I wanted to also share that SHRM activity code with you all for the SHRM recertification credit. So this webinar is approved for this one PDC. So you can take a screenshot if you want of the screen. I'll also type this into the chat. So you just go to the SHRM portal, enter this in, and then you can get your credit. We'll also be sending that out in the email follow-up as well. So if you lose it or you forget to take a screenshot, don't worry, we'll also send it out. And it's also, if you want to send this to someone else who wants to watch the replay, they can also get that credit. And then finally, right after the webinar today, there's going to be a poll that you'll be redirected to. So I'd love to hear like your feedback, what you all thought today. It's really helpful for us for planning these webinars in the future. So if you have a minute when this webinar ends, you'll be redirected to that, and it'll also go out in the follow-up email as well. So that's everything for me. Now I'd love to just open it up to questions. I know Catherine has been kind of looking at that. So yeah, feel free to, we have like 4 more minutes. So would look forward to hearing from you guys.
Yeah, thanks so much for your leadership on this, Melissa and Brian. Really great discussion that we had today. I think just emphasizing, we will be looking for a note from Melissa later today with some of the resources. I saw some folks say on the chat they couldn't click on those, so she will get a cumulative summary of all this good stuff. And our team will also follow up early next week just to see what questions you have. Sometimes it takes a couple days to kind of percolate. So feel free to send us any questions if you think of something later too. I see Rosanna's question. Do you have any ideas or information about tackling ageism in the workplace? Yeah, age is a huge area of bias. In fact, research shows it's the #1 area where we tend to prefer working with younger people to older people, and there's stereotypes and folks have about older people not being good with technology or not being as committed or not open to change. That's actually not based on real evidence or data. Those are just stereotypes that can be super harmful and limiting. So age, when we talk about diversity, age is one component, right? Race, gender, age, socioeconomic. I think looking at it holistically is what's really important. But absolutely, I think 96% of folks have that bias, that ageist. And so you have to watch out for it. You have to intervene with it. I myself have to check my bias all the time because our brains are wired, to make to assume categories and make assumptions about categories, and if we're not careful, can behave in ways that aren't harmful for that. Samantha, any thoughts on DEI book club? Yeah, I think, Samantha, just the watch out there is sometimes book clubs can come off performative, meaning performative allyship is kind of like, I'm reading the book, I'm listening to podcasts, but I'm not doing the things. So active allyship, I would encourage you to focus that on books that have a component of active allyship. We actually have a full resource list, Catherine, too, with a plethora of books that I've personally vetted myself. I think would be really good for a very productive book club as well. I think it's great, but don't make that the only thing you do. Right? Education's one, but action, doing something with it, something is really important. And getting senior leaders at that book club is really, really important. Good. Any other questions coming through? Did I miss anything? When we have, okay, I just thought, Catherine, is it that when we have a white minority client base, how do we show that we are internally making a difference for each other? Well, that's very interesting. I don't hear that very often. I think being intentional, however you want to state your intentions, but mirroring the communities of which we want to serve, right? And so really thinking, if we do have, a minority base that tends to be the majority group, how do we better reflect that? How do we talk openly about that? And I think the biggest thing in this work is being super intentional, being consistent, and then again, that leadership factor, having them be engaged in this and that why for it. And I appreciate that perspective. Any other questions? Oh, intentional. Elena, that was the word I was just adding. So intentional, consistent, and having senior leadership engaged. Those are really 3 things. Like when we first start talking with a client, we listen for in the conversation, because we can't really help folks if you're not willing to do those things, or at least try to do those things. And Debbie, we will share the link to the calendar as well. Melissa shared that up in the chat as well. I think we're winding down. We're at time. Thanks y'all for being with us today. It was so lovely. I hope this is the first conversation of many. Stay in touch. And thanks, Melissa and Brian, for all the great work that you're doing at Cooleaf.
Thanks, Julie. That was so informative and really helpful. And yes, we'll definitely be sending out the recording and all of these resources just later this afternoon. So look out for that.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye.